It is Black Friday, and hopefully none of you are out right now getting trampled on or anything like that. But whether or not you participate in the day's festivities, you have to admit, Black Friday has a strange hold on all of us. Hello, and welcome to the Modern Context Podcast. I'm your host, Yasmin Aaliyah Khan, and I'm so glad that you're here. If you're returning, thank you for doing so, and if you're new here, thank you for stopping by. I hope that you're into whatever it is that we do here. So yesterday was Thanksgiving, and this past week has been absolutely crazy for me, but in a good way. I hosted Thanksgiving for my family this year, so we had a full house, but leading up to the day, I was working on this podcast episode, but I was also planning and prepping the meal, which takes a lot more time than most people who have never done it probably realize. Then I was finishing up on some decor projects around the house, projects that I, for some reason, decided to embark on right before the busiest time of year. But no regrets. I got it all out of the way just in time to have everyone over for a gigantic meal. And I know that you're all dying for an update on what I've been doing around my house. I will spare you the details, but the highlights are that I painted my dining room, including the ceiling. And if you've never painted a ceiling before, let me tell you, it's work. I also finished my breakfast nook. We installed chair rail and we put trim around the window. I made a window seat cushion using an old curtain panel. I restored an old chandelier and installed it. And then I redid an old dresser twice. I didn't like the color of the oak, so once it was all done, I decided that I was going to go back and stain it. So I did that. Anyway, the walls of the nook above the chair rail are wallpapered with this gorgeous floral paper, and it is just the coziest. And I may or may not already have a Christmas tree up. I usually am pretty strict about no Christmas until after Thanksgiving, but I find that I've been less strict about that particular rule in recent years. The pandemic changed me. Besides, don't they say that people who decorate early for the holidays are happier than people who don't? I want to be one of those happy people. But while I was doing all of these projects around the house, I was constantly shopping online for little things here and there. Normally, I don't shop too much. I'm not a huge spender, but when I do shop, I try to buy things that are going to last a while, things that are timeless rather than trendy, which means that they're also somewhat sustainable and that I'm not planning to trash them within a few years. My purchases are very deliberate, and of course, I always want a good deal if there's one to be had. So I started shopping for all this house stuff in maybe early October, which was when I started all of these projects. I had a list of things that I needed: a rug for the breakfast nook, curtains and shades for the windows, special light bulbs for the chandelier, and more. But as I was shopping in early October, I noticed something that I don't remember ever seeing before: Black Friday deals in early October. Like I said, I'm not a big shopper, so it's very possible that this has been a thing for a long time and I've just never noticed. But back in my day, Black Friday was pretty traditionally limited to that one day, the Friday after Thanksgiving, the number one shopping day in the United States. I suppose the holiday, if you want to call it that, had a natural evolution. It happened to be a big shopping day just because no one wanted to do anything the day after Thanksgiving. They probably still had family in town, so they just go shop at the mall, just get ahead of any last-minute Christmas rush. So then retailers started catering to the day, enticing even more shoppers to turn up with additional discounts for that day only. Retailers started opening right at midnight. Some started opening up on Thanksgiving evening. And the rest is history. Black Friday deals became a ubiquitous influence where consumerism as it pertains to the holidays was concerned. Each Black Friday, the deals would get better and better, and more shoppers would turn out. For every Christian trying to put Christ back into Christmas, there's probably 10 capitalists trying to make sure people remember what the holidays are really about. The deals and the crowds fed each other, and it would go on like this for years. Now, I haven't even mentioned all the fights and the stampedes and just the overall ratchetness of it all, but you all know about that. It's American folklore at this point. It's just a part of our culture. But maybe, just maybe, that's changing. With the rise of online retailers like Amazon that promise speedy deliveries, and with the rise of social media that utilizes targeted ads to drive sales for businesses, there's little reason for people to step into a mall these days. At this point in the podcast, I was going to insert an anecdote from my own personal experience about how dead malls are these days and how every time I go to the mall, there's no one there. But then it occurred to me, I am one of those missing mall patrons. I don't even know what the inside of a mall looks like anymore because I can't tell you the last time that I was inside a mall. Our local mall here has an outdoor portion that's mainly restaurants, and I go there sometimes, but I haven't set foot inside the actual mall in a while, like months. But why would I? Most of the stores that I used to go to are no longer there. They've been replaced with less interesting stores that no one's really heard of. I also feel like the wealth gap is on full display at the mall. Things are either super expensive and designer, or they are super cheap, fast fashion brands that are no good for a lot of reasons. Gone are the days of Booyaka and 579. Hot Topic is still hanging on, I think, but do these kids even know about Hot Topic? Like, do they get it? I have no idea. In my adult life, even if they were still around, I wouldn't be shopping at places like the aforementioned. If we examined them with a 2023 mindset, we'd probably find that they maybe weren't the most ethically run, and I remember their hyper trendy fashions being frustrating for me at the time. If I didn't like whatever was currently trending and selling in the stores, I didn't have much of a choice but to buy whatever the stores were selling. I didn't have as much autonomy over my own personal expression as I maybe would have liked. But then online shopping became a thing. Consumers suddenly had all the options. And we had the luxury of sorting through metaphorical racks of clothing without having to lift more than a finger on a computer mouse. The catch, however, is that online shopping lacked the instant gratification that was one of the most addictive aspects of retail therapy. But then Amazon, which became popular in the mid to late 90s as an online bookstore of all things, branched out from books to literally everything. And honestly, the world has never been the same. This transformation happened quite quickly too, and you don't need to look much further than Tom Hanks for confirmation. In the 90s, the internet was brand new. I can't believe I'm about to explain this, but to get online, you had to be sitting in front of your computer and connected to a phone line. Internet usage wasn't widespread. Many people didn't have personal computers in their homes. America was simply not online until America Online, or AOL, started finding its way into homes. As people got more computers in their homes, they needed a way to connect. AOL's trial CDs were everywhere, providing people with a low-commitment entry into the teleconnected space. The phrase, "you've got mail," became the chime of the time, back at a time when emails were exciting and not absolutely dreadful. And speaking of exciting/dreadful things, a rom-com came out in 1998 starring Meg Ryan, Tom Hanks, and Dave Chappelle in the best friend role called You've Got Mail. It was a hit when it first came out, but watching that movie today is a strange experience. At the start of the movie, Meg Ryan's character lives in New York City, and she runs a super cute, super quaint little independent bookshop. She's passionate about her work, and she loves her bookshop and all of the books in it, and her business is being threatened by Fox Books, the big, evil corporate bookstore. Fox Books lacks warmth. Its employees don't know the books they sell, but none of that matters because at Fox Books, they've got economies of scale. Fox Books does eventually put Meg Ryan out of business, but the story is that the small bookshop owner falls in love with Tom Hanks over email, not knowing that her online pen pal is the heir to the Fox Books empire, the very same capitalistic monster who put her cherished and charming small business out of business, sterilized the neighborhood with a big box chain store, and ensured that only something bigger and more formidable could ever take its place. By the end of the movie, she finds out that her pen pal and Tom Hanks are the same person, and she is totally fine with it. It's a happy ending. Presumably, she goes on to marry the corporate monster who had no respect for the life she once lived, nor for the bookstore that she once loved. The irony was that by 1998, The thing that would supplant the big box stores, like Borders, for example, if you remember them, was already here. It's interesting that You've Got Mail chose to focus on bookstores and that Amazon started out as an online bookstore. I don't need to tell you what Amazon would go on to become. Today, 2-day and even same-day deliveries have now become the norm for online consumers. It's no longer seen so much as a perk as it is a feature. The instant gratification that may have once been missing from the online retail experience is now less of a problem. A new kind of dopamine hit has even emerged where people can just get some kind of satisfaction just from placing things in your online cart. I suppose putting things in your cart, adding them to your wish list, or saving them for later could be similar to window shopping. But is window shopping entirely obsolete these days? Do people just go to the mall just to walk around, look, and maybe buy anymore? More than just window shopping and commerce, though, the mall was a place for people watching, for just meeting and interacting with people. Today, the mall simply isn't the hangout destination or the cultural epicenter it once was, and we're worse off for it. The way our landscape is generally organized these days, speaking specifically about the United States, is that we have urban and rural areas. Between the two, we've got suburban areas, more commonly known as the suburbs. Today, the wealthiest people tend to live and work in the big cities, especially very wealthy people without children. That's where the big business is, that's where the freedom is, that's where the excitement is. Real estate in major cities is astronomically more expensive than it is even just outside of those cities, and they often serve as tourist destinations for Americans and international travelers alike. Conversely, rural areas, I can never say that word, are seen as having less money, they're more spread out, and they're less diverse. Life there seems to be slower, and you certainly don't get as many outsiders passing through those rural areas as you see in urban areas. Most people simply don't have any particular reason to visit any particular rural town, unless maybe they happen to know someone who lives there. In the modern world, for the most part, the wealthy live in the cities and the workers live in the rural areas. Back in the day, especially in Europe, however, the opposite was true. The work was in the cities, so entire populations of working class people lived there. The wealthy who had the luxury of not having to labor every day for their wealth would get to enjoy peace and quiet and clean air out in the country, a true luxury compared to life in the soot-filled and cacophonous cities. There, out in the country, they could ride horses, they could hunt, garden, and do other activities that can really only be done when one has access to large tracts of private land. By the late 19th century, the car was invented, and by the early 1900s, Henry Ford would unleash the Model T onto the world. Now, I don't know how many of you think about things like this, but the car is one of the most controversial inventions of the modern world. I will give you a quick rundown of the arguments for and against the car, and you can decide how you feel about it. The pros are that the car obviously gets you to your destination faster than walking. It has eliminated the need to walk most places, and it made the world smaller, but depending on your personal views, those 2 points might make more sense as cons. The car relieved animals like horses from the burden of pulling carriages of people, and it got rid of the need for people to care for those animals. The car grants you privacy and insulation from the outside world, both its people and its elements. But the biggest pro-car argument that you will usually hear is that it grants individuals freedom of movement. Now, I was trying not to be biased with this, but I'll be honest that the list of cons is way longer, and I'm not even going to hit all of the cons. For one, the car eliminated the need to walk most places, and for me, that is a con. Without walking, we become detached from our immediate surroundings and from our neighbors. Without people outside walking, there is very little interaction amongst people. Yes, you have privacy, and yes, you have so-called independence, but you also have isolation. The car pollutes our atmosphere, which is an obvious con, I think. But its dependency on oil and gas has transformed the globe. in terms of geopolitics and international relations. If you listen to this podcast, or if you listen to my previous podcast, Global Thread, pretty much any of the international stories that I covered, any of those global conflicts discussed, they always came back to the oil and gas issue. The oil and gas industry drives major economies around the world, and it depletes smaller economies. It often opens smaller governments up to hostile foreign intervention, and it can be a major driver of wealth inequality. And then there's the infrastructure that cars require. Our cities are covered in asphalt. Our lands are paved over for wider streets and bigger parking lots. Images of modern cities tend to all look the same, crisscrossed with freeways, overpasses, and underpasses. Trees and fields are sacrificed for the car infrastructure, which is unfortunate because more trees would have actually helped us to offset the carbon load that cars deposit into the atmosphere. What else? They kill people. They're incredibly dangerous. They're dangerous for the drivers, they're dangerous for the other drivers, and they're dangerous even for non-drivers, aka pedestrians. One last thing that I'll mention is that the freedom of car licensure is also a bit of a smokescreen. It's not really freedom when car ownership, which is, by the way, incredibly expensive and requires a ton of maintenance, is no longer considered a privilege because it's more of a necessity. Society has molded itself and transformed to be more car-friendly and more car-centric. Many places, most, I would think, don't have good, safe, or reliable public transit systems. Biking isn't an option for most people because, for one, it requires a certain level of physical fitness, but also, cities don't often account for the safety of bicyclists when designing infrastructure. Additionally, biking isn't always feasible, given the weather either for that day or for an entire season, and walking is hardly even an option for people anymore. Case in point, my grocery store is 4 miles away from me, which is a 12-minute drive or a 2-hour walk according to Google Maps. I wouldn't know, I've never tried to walk there. Even if I wanted to try though, it wouldn't be great for me. I would have to walk alongside a fairly busy road on a rickety, tiny sidewalk that was definitely added as an afterthought, and I would be inhaling car fumes the whole way. Also, I live in Texas, so it gets very hot, and after they cut down all the trees to make room for the wider streets and for the strip malls, there's not a whole lot of shade. It's just you and the Texas sun and nothing in between. But if no one is walking or biking, just driving, then urban sprawl isn't a problem. Cities can sprawl as far away from the city centers as they want. And then if people are driving everywhere, then there needs to be roads and parking lots for them to drive on and park on. Parking lots take up a lot of room and they require that businesses be even further apart from each other. And so the problem just continues and compounds. So you already know about Henry Ford and what he's done for us. Let's talk about a man you probably haven't heard of, a man called William Levitt. William Levitt is known today as the father of suburbia. Suburbia is something we're all more than familiar with. Identical houses neatly organized into subdivisions, good schools, HOAs, maybe some parks, malls, a cheesecake factory, etc. But it all started with William Levitt and Levittown. Levittown was the first American suburb located just outside of New York City. Built in 1947, it was designed specifically for vets, many of whom were young, newlywed, and looking for somewhere affordable and nice to start a family. The homes were constructed cheaply and uniformly so as to minimize money and time spent on parts and labor. To do this, Levitt took a tip from Henry Ford's playbook and basically assembly-lined home building. From this, the idea of the 50s-style housewife was born. The idea of the perfect American family was born, the image of the white picket fence, the 2.4 children, the Leave It to Beaver, Pleasantville, Stepford wives perfection that would come to be synonymous with post-war white America was born. And the white part actually is pretty significant. As a rule, no Black people and no Jewish people were allowed in Levittown. Levitt, by the way, was himself a Jew. So there was no color or diversity amongst the people, and not really any amongst the houses either. There was no character between the homes, and there was no architectural pride. It was a great capitalist experiment, and we're still in it today. The suburb would eventually diversify, and the idea of the suburb would eventually spread across the country, selling themselves as more quiet than cities, but within reach of them. They're supposedly great for starting families and for raising children, and if you want any kind of semblance of a backyard these days, you're more than likely looking for a place in the suburbs. And just like how the original suburb featured carbon-copied homes and carbon-copied families, suburbs across the country are carbon-copied images of each other. The suburb would have been impossible without cars. I live in a suburb and I would have to walk 15 minutes just to get out of my neighborhood, and then I wouldn't even be anywhere. I'd just be on the side of some major road. Sometimes we'll see like the neighborhood kids playing basketball in their driveways or a neighbor tending to their garden, but other than that, I don't even see my neighbors. No one is out walking anywhere unless they're deliberately going for a walk, so no one sees anyone unless they happen to catch someone going from their car door to their front door. And as we continue to self-isolate, whether that means gating our communities, staying in our houses, driving everywhere we go, or whatever, we find ourselves getting lonelier as a people. Because of the ways in which cars and suburbs and more have redesigned our national society, we're now missing what have come to be known as third spaces. The idea is that your home is your first or primary space that you exist in. The second space is your work, even though in recent years, especially post-pandemic, the first and second space have just merged into the one. But the third space was supposed to be the place you could go to be around other people. Community centers, places where you could interact with others without necessarily having to plan to meet anyone, places where you don't necessarily have to spend a ton of money just to be there. Third spaces can be things like a local pub where you could just go, stop in, say hi to some folks, and then maybe just hang out for the cost of a beer, if that. They can be libraries, though you have to be quiet in those. They could also just be outdoor spaces in the middle of cities. They could be parks or farmers markets, just anywhere where people can go and be and experience people and a culture. Europe has got a ton of them. Here we don't. If I just want to be around people, the easiest way for me to do that is to literally drive those 12 minutes to my grocery store, and I can't just hang out at an H-E-B. It's hard to find a third space in the suburbs, especially if you don't want to sit in a Starbucks all day, but we did at one point have malls. The closest thing to, say, a piazza that we ever had in the suburbs were places where people could go to sit and eat and drink and shop and just be. It was incredibly common in the 90s and 2000s to just go to the mall when you had nothing else to do, and most times you would run into someone while you were there. Malls were a strange microcosm of community, and as someone who has spent a ton of time in malls in my youth, it's kind of crazy to think about how far and how quickly society has evolved past them. So without malls, where could one go to see or even make friends? There are bars, but not everyone drinks, and bars can get expensive. There are restaurants, but no one's meeting new people at a restaurant. Parks are unfortunately few and far between these days, depending on where you live. Libraries and bookshops have almost become like forgotten bits of yesteryear. And outdoor walking spaces that weren't designed exclusively for exercise, we've talked about this, they don't really exist anymore. They're in Europe though. If you want to walk, I guess you just have to go to Europe. We've got New York City here and parts of other cities like Boston, DC, and a few others, but Americans have been robbed of the simplicity and luxury of walking. In a way, our third space has become the online digital space, which is sad for so many reasons, but I am admittedly very old-fashioned. The idea of the future makes no sense to me, which is perhaps why I'm always talking about the past, but with more and more of us just on our phones all day, every day, advertisers know exactly how and where to reach us. Targeted algorithms dictate so much of what our lives have become, and it's no more obvious than at this very time of the year. My email inbox is inundated with Black Friday deals right now, but not only that, every time I open a social media app or even a web browser, I'm hit with ads showing me one-time only discounts that I would apparently be stupid to pass up. I mentioned that I was shopping a lot more than I usually do over the past couple of months, most of which was online, but I was shopping in the interior decor space. Let me tell you, consumerism is rampant everywhere you go, we know that, but it makes even less sense to me in the interior design world. Trends within that particular world make little sense to me, especially now with societal preferences changing as fast as each newly trending hashtag on TikTok. If people were to update their home decor with each new trend, it would be an incredibly wasteful and unsustainable endeavor. And to that point, with people more aware and conscientious of the impact that our overconsumption has on our environments, not to mention how much people's bank accounts are hurting in this economy, you would think that Black Friday would no longer have the cultural significance that it once had. However, the numbers simply don't show that. Part of the endurance of Black Friday is attributable to the fact that the day has transformed beyond just the day. Many of my recent purchases that I made over the past few weeks would probably be considered to be part of the Black Friday sales. Also, many people are obviously spending more money this time of year than any other time of the year, whether that's on gifts for themselves, gifts for others, or gifts for around the house. Black Friday is a great time to get yourself a new toaster or a television or whatever. But as we all come to understand a little bit more about this modern world that we live in, I think we can all expect to see the day and even the holiday season continue to transform, particularly within the next few years. All right, that is it for episode 8 of the Modern Context podcast. I really hope that you all had a lovely Thanksgiving, however you did or didn't celebrate your day off from work, and I really hope that you all have a very safe and fruitful Black Friday. Anyway, until next time, we would love to hear from you. Please reach out to the show at hello@modconpod.com with any suggestions or questions you might have for us. Also, do not forget to follow and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on YouTube, tell your friends about us, do all the things. And of course, thank you for listening. Happy Thanksgiving. I can't wait to see you all next time. Cheers. Modern Context is a Rabble Babble production, produced by Brandon Morgan and recorded live in Houston, Texas. For Modern Context, I'm your writer and host, Yasmin Aaliyah Khan.